The concert hall was full that evening, filled with people wearing fine clothes and perfume, waiting for the great maestro Victor Hale to arrive. He was a man everyone respected, a musical genius known for his sharp ear and strict tests. He had announced an open challenge to find someone who could truly understand music, not just play notes but feel them. Musicians from every corner came with their instruments, full of confidence. Each one believed they could impress the maestro, but none of them knew that among the crowd stood a small blind girl, holding a white cane and a shy smile. Her name was Mira. She was only 12. Her mother stood beside her, adjusting her daughter's coat and whispering softly, "You can do this." Mira nodded slowly, her long hair falling over the silk blindfold covering her eyes. She always wore it, not because she needed to, but because it reminded her of what she had already lost. The world had gone dark for her when she was 6, but her heart had never stopped listening. The hall lights dimmed as Maestro Victor entered. Tall and serious, his presence was powerful, and when he raised his hand, silence spread instantly. He spoke with authority. "Today we search for someone who can feel music, not just repeat it." His voice echoed across the room. Some people whispered to each other. Excited and nervous, others smiled proudly, ready to prove themselves. When the maestro called the first name, a young boy stepped forward. He played fast and loud, full of energy. The maestro nodded politely but showed no emotion. The next was a woman who played a gentle tune, beautiful but predictable. Again, the maestro said nothing. His eyes moved over the audience, scanning faces, and then he saw Mira, a small girl, standing quietly at the back with her mother, her hands resting on her cane, her head tilted slightly upward as if she could sense his gaze. The maestro frowned. "A child," he muttered under his breath. But what caught his attention even more was the black silk blindfold covering her eyes. When Mira's mother stepped forward, she spoke softly. "My daughter wishes to try." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Someone whispered, "She can't even see the notes." Another said, "This must be a joke." Mira stood still, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't react to the laughter. She had heard worse before. The maestro looked uncertain. He had never allowed something like this before, but something about her calm expression made him pause. "All right," he said finally. "Let her come forward." His tone was firm but curious. Mira's mother guided her carefully to the stage. The sound of her cane tapping against the wooden floor echoed softly through the silent hall. When she reached the piano, she stopped and turned her head slightly. As if she could see through the darkness, her fingers touched the keys gently, tracing them like old friends. The maestro folded his arms. "Do you know what you are about to do?" he asked. Mira nodded. "Yes, sir," she said in a clear but quiet voice. "I am here to listen." The maestro raised an eyebrow. "To listen?" he repeated. "Not to play?" Mira smiled faintly. "Music is not something you see, sir. It's something you feel." Her words made a few people in the crowd shift uncomfortably. Others rolled their eyes. The maestro gave a small sigh. "Very well, child. Let us see what you can feel." He turned to the piano and began to play a quick, complex piece. His fingers danced over the keys, filling the room with bright, racing notes. The melody twisted and turned, unpredictable and sharp. It was the kind of piece that even trained musicians struggled to follow. Mira stood still beside the piano. Her head slightly tilted, her breathing was slow. Her fingers moved in the air, tracing invisible patterns. Each note seemed to touch her like a whisper. She didn't need eyes, she had something stronger. When the maestro stopped, the room was silent again. Everyone waited for him to dismiss her. But instead, Mira sat down slowly at the piano. Her hands hovered over the keys, and then she began to play. At first, the maestro frowned. The first few notes were the same as his, perfectly the same. Then she continued, repeating his entire melody without a single mistake. Her rhythm matched his, her timing flawless. Every rise, every pause, every tiny detail. She remembered it all. People leaned forward, unable to believe what they were hearing. The woman in the front row covered her mouth. The boy who had played earlier stared in shock. The maestro's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected this, not from a blind girl, not from anyone. When she finished, she lifted her fingers from the keys and turned her face toward the maestro. "Was that enough, sir?" she asked softly. The maestro didn't answer right away. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he gave a small nod, his voice lower this time. "Yes," he said slowly. That was enough. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay silent. They just stared at the little girl who had walked on stage blindfolded and done the impossible. Some people who had laughed earlier now looked ashamed. Mira smiled faintly, her face calm. She couldn't see their faces, but she could feel their change. As she left the stage, the maestro's eyes followed her, his mind filled with questions. Who was this girl? How could she play like that without seeing? He didn't say it aloud, but deep inside he knew something rare had just happened that night. Something that would change the way he saw music and life forever. The next morning, the story of the blindfolded girl had already spread across the music academy. Students whispered in the corridors. Teachers discussed her performance over tea. And even the maestro, who was known for never showing emotion, seemed distant and thoughtful. He kept replaying that moment in his mind. The sound of her fingers dancing across the piano, matching every note he had played the night before. It wasn't luck, it wasn't imitation. It was something deeper, something that felt like truth. Meanwhile, Mira sat quietly in her small room, the morning sunlight spilling across her bed. She couldn't see it, but she could feel its warmth on her hands. Her mother placed a cup of warm milk beside her and said softly, "People are talking about you, my love." Mira smiled gently. "Are they saying good things this time?" Her mother laughed softly. "Mostly," she said. "Some are still saying you got lucky." Mira turned her head slightly, her blindfold resting gently over her eyes. "Maybe they're right, Mama. Maybe it was luck. But I think luck is just another word for listening." Her mother smiled sadly, remembering the years of struggle, the endless nights when Mira would sit by the window listening to the sounds of rain, copying the rhythm on her old second-hand keyboard. There had been no teacher, no proper lessons, only her ears and her heart. Later that day, a knock came at their small apartment door. Mira's mother opened it and froze. Standing there was Maestro Victor Hale himself, dressed in his usual black coat, his sharp eyes softer than usual. "Good afternoon," he said politely. "I hope I'm not intruding." Mira's mother stepped aside quickly. "Speechless, please come in," she whispered. When Mira heard his voice, she stood up instantly. "Sir," she said quietly, "I didn't expect—" "I wanted to see you again," the maestro interrupted. "I owe you an apology." Mira frowned slightly. "For what?" "For doubting you," he said, his tone surprisingly humble. "When you walked onto that stage, I thought it was a waste of time. But you proved me wrong." Mira tilted her head, a shy smile forming. "You didn't need to apologize, sir. You gave me a chance, and that's all I needed." Her words touched him more than he expected. He looked around the small, humble apartment, noticing the old keyboard, the cracked wall, the faint smell of coffee, and thought about how far she must have come without any help. "I want you to come to the academy," he said suddenly. "I'll personally teach you. You have something extraordinary, and it must be refined." Mira's mother's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, sir, that's a blessing," she said softly. Mira hesitated. "Sir," she whispered, "will people there accept me?" The maestro paused, thinking about the laughter that filled the hall when she first appeared. "At first, maybe not," he admitted, "but after they hear you play again, they'll have no choice." His confidence gave her courage. She nodded slowly. "Then I'll come," she said. When she arrived at the academy the next day, whispers followed her again. Some students pointed. Others pretended not to notice. "That's the blind girl," one boy muttered. "She can't even read sheet music," Mira heard the words. But they didn't hurt as much anymore. She simply smiled and said softly to herself, "They'll hear soon." Inside the grand music room, the maestro sat at the piano, waiting. The same grand instrument she had played before. The sound of her cane tapping across the floor grew closer, and she stopped right beside him. "Good morning, sir," she said. "Good morning, Mira," he replied. "Today, no performance today, we learn." He began to explain the basics of rhythm and timing, then paused, realizing she already knew. She could identify every key by touch, every note by vibration. "Who taught you this?" he asked in amazement. Mira smiled. "The world did. Sir, the rain, the birds, the heartbeat of my mother when she held me. They all have rhythm." The maestro stared at her for a moment, realizing he was not just a teacher today, he was a student too. Days passed, and Mira's talent grew even more. She could recognize any piece of music after hearing it once. She played not from memory but from emotion, turning even simple melodies into something living. The maestro began inviting other students to listen to her. Watch how she plays. He would say, she doesn't see the notes. She feels them. But not everyone was happy. Some older students whispered that the maestro was wasting his time. She's not real talent, one sneered. She's just a novelty, another said. Maybe he pities her. They didn't know Mira could hear them even from across the room. One afternoon during practice, one of those students, a boy named Liam, challenged her. If you're really that good, he said mockingly, play what I play, right after me. He sat at the piano and began a rapid, complex tune, smiling arrogantly. When he finished, he leaned back. Your turn, he said. Mira stepped forward silently, touching the keys with her delicate fingers. She played the same tune, not only perfectly, but with a softness that made it sound more beautiful. The arrogance faded from Liam's face, and the maestro, standing nearby, smiled faintly. Music, he said quietly, is not about competition. It's about connection. That night, when Mira went home, she told her mother everything. Her mother hugged her tightly. You see? She whispered. You were never meant to follow the world's rhythm. You were meant to create your own. Mira smiled and nodded, resting her head on her mother's shoulder, listening to her heartbeat, her first and truest metronome. And while the world outside still whispered about the blindfolded girl, inside that little home, she was no longer the child who was doubted. She was the girl who made even silence sing, the girl who taught a maestro to see beyond sight, and the one who was slowly turning disbelief into wonder. The great hall was quiet again, sunlight slipping through tall glass windows, dust floating like tiny stars in the air. Mira sat at the grand piano, her fingers resting gently on the keys. She had been coming to the academy for weeks now, and though the whispers hadn't fully stopped, something inside her had changed. She no longer felt small or afraid. She felt music breathing inside her, alive, waiting. The maestro entered, his black coat sweeping across the polished floor. His sharp eyes softened when he saw her. Good morning, Mira, he said. Are you ready for today's lesson? Mira smiled faintly. Always, sir, she replied. The maestro placed a sheet of music on the stand in front of her, though he knew she couldn't see it. It was his habit, his structure, and old habits die slowly. He began to play, his fingers striking the piano with force and control. The melody was powerful, full of passion, quick changes, and hidden traps. It was one of his own compositions, something he had written long ago to test the best of his students. The notes moved like waves, climbing and crashing in unexpected rhythms. Mira listened closely, her head tilting slightly, her hands twitching on her lap. She wasn't just hearing the sound. She was feeling it, the warmth, the vibration, the pulse of each tone. When he stopped, the hall was silent. The maestro folded his arms and said, Now, play what you remember. Mira took a deep breath and began. The first few notes flowed smoothly, mirroring his performance. But then something strange happened. She started to change it. She added small touches, soft pauses, new transitions. It was the same song, yet somehow not the same at all. It was warmer, sadder, more human. The maestro's brow furrowed as he listened. At first, he thought she had made mistakes. But then he realized, no, she hadn't. She was interpreting, translating his melody into something alive, something emotional. He could feel her version telling a story his never did. His had been about power. Hers was about feeling. When she finished, her fingers lifted softly from the keys. She turned her face toward him. Was it close? She asked with a shy smile. The maestro took a moment before speaking. It wasn't close, he said quietly. Mira's smile faded slightly, but then he continued. It was better. Her head lifted in surprise. Better? She repeated softly. Yes, he said firmly. You didn't just repeat what I played, you understood it, you transformed it. That is what true musicians do. For the first time, there was pride in his voice, genuine, unguarded pride. Suddenly, a slow clap echoed from the back of the hall. It was Liam, the boy who had once challenged her. Oh, come on, he said with a smirk. Better than you, sir? That's impossible. The maestro's eyes narrowed. Liam, he said sternly, but the boy continued. She's just mimicking you. It's all a trick. Mira stayed silent, her hands folded in her lap. The maestro turned to her. Mira, he said calmly, would you mind showing him how wrong he is? Mira nodded softly. What should I play? she asked. Play something of your own, the maestro said. Mira hesitated. Her own? She had never shared her own music before. Her heart began to race. She could almost hear her mother's voice whispering, "You can do it, my love." She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes were soft like a lullaby. Her fingers moved slowly, building layer after layer. The sound filled the hall, wrapping around every listener like a blanket. It was a song that told her story, of losing sight, of pain, of rain on her window, of her mother's heartbeat, and of the courage it took to walk on stage that night. As the music grew, something magical happened. Even Liam stopped smirking. His arms fell to his sides, his face blank with awe. The maestro closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. Each note felt like a confession, each pause like a breath. When she played the final note, the sound hung in the air before fading into silence. For a long moment, no one moved. It was as if the hall itself was holding its breath. Then slowly, the maestro began to clap. One steady clap at a time, the other students followed, until the whole room echoed with applause. Mira turned her head toward the sound, her cheeks warm with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered softly. "Thank you for listening." Liam stepped forward awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "That was unbelievable," he said quietly. "I didn't mean what I said earlier." Mira smiled gently. "It's all right," she said. "Sometimes people need to hear before they can believe." After everyone left, the maestro remained in the hall. Watching Mira pack her things, "Mira," he said, "where did that song come from?" She paused, touching the piano once more. "From the quiet," she said, "when you can't see. Silence becomes your teacher. It tells you where the music hides." The maestro nodded slowly, understanding more than she knew. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll try something new." "I'll play with you." Mira's head lifted in surprise. "A duet?" she asked. "Yes," he said, smiling faintly. "If you can play from the heart, then I should learn to listen like you do." That night, Mira went home humming softly. Her mother listened from the doorway, smiling proudly. "How was your day, my dear?" she asked. "The maestro said my song was better than his," Mira said. Laughing shyly, her mother chuckled. "Then the world is finally hearing what I've always known." As Mira lay in bed later, she could still feel the vibration of the piano keys under her fingers. She could hear the applause, the kindness in the maestro's voice, and the sound of her own heart keeping rhythm. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel blind, she felt endless, limitless, like music itself, and deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The world was starting to listen. The next morning arrived with a soft drizzle, raindrops tapping gently against the academy windows like 1,000 tiny drums. Mira sat quietly near the grand piano, her fingers tracing its smooth surface. She always arrived before anyone else. She liked the silence, the smell of rain, and the way the empty hall echoed every soft sound. It was like the world's music warming up, waiting to begin. Soon the familiar sound of footsteps echoed, steady, confident, precise. It was Maestro Victor Hale, his coat slightly wet from the rain. "Good morning, Mira," he said, placing his umbrella by the door. "You're early again," Mira smiled softly. "Music doesn't like to wait, sir." The maestro chuckled for the first time in weeks. "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "And today, the music will test us both." He sat beside her at the piano, something he had never done before. Usually, he stood like a strict examiner, watching her from a distance, but today, he was close enough that Mira could feel the warmth of his presence. "Are we playing together?" she asked curiously. "Yes," he said. "A duet?" Mira's fingers trembled slightly. "What if I can't follow you?" "Then I will follow you," he replied gently. "Music is not a race, Mira. It's a conversation," the maestro began first, his fingers commanding and powerful. Every note struck with perfection, precise like thunder. Mira listened, her head slightly tilted, her heart beating in rhythm with the song. Then slowly she joined in. Her notes were lighter, more emotional. She didn't match his strength. She balanced it where he was sharp. She was soft where he was fast. She was calm. The two melodies began to weave together, sometimes colliding, sometimes dancing side by side. It was as if the piano was speaking two languages that somehow understood each other perfectly. The maestro's rigid style began to soften as he adjusted to her flow. He was learning something he had never been taught. Mira wasn't following the notes, she was following his emotion. Minutes passed and their duet grew wilder, deeper, the rhythm shifting. The maestro decided to test her. He added sudden pauses, unexpected chords, and dissonant tones. He wanted to see if she could keep up when the structure disappeared. But instead of stumbling, Mira smiled faintly and flowed around his tricks like water finding its way through stone. When he stopped abruptly, she didn't, she continued, turning his abrupt ending into something hauntingly beautiful. The melody slowed and faded like the rain softening into mist. The maestro's hands froze. His eyes widened slightly. He was astonished. "How did you do that?" he asked softly. "You stopped following me completely." Mira tilted her head. "Because you stopped listening," she said. "So I played what you left unsaid." Her words hit him like lightning. He leaned back, staring at her in disbelief and admiration. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the rain outside, whispering against the glass. Finally, the maestro exhaled slowly. "You remind me," he said quietly, "of why I fell in love with music in the first place." Later that afternoon, other students gathered in the hall, drawn by the whispers that the maestro and the blind girl were playing together. They sat quietly at the back waiting. When the maestro and Mira began their second duet, something magical happened. This time, the maestro didn't lead. He let her start. Her fingers moved softly. Guiding the melody like a thread of light, the maestro followed, and together, they created something new, something not written on any sheet. The students watching forgot to breathe. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was a story, told in sound. When the last note faded, silence filled the room. Then, one by one, the students began to clap, not out of politeness, but out of pure awe. Liam, standing near the door, whispered, "It's like they're talking without words." Another student nodded. "No, it's like they're feeling the same heartbeat." The maestro stood and looked at Mira with pride. "You've done something rare," he said. "You've turned sound into emotion." Mira smiled. "That's what it's always been for me, sir. Music is how I see the world." He wanted to say something more, something deeper, but words felt small compared to what she had just shown him. Instead, he gently touched her shoulder. "You've taught me today," he said quietly, "and for that, I thank you." After the hall emptied, Mira stayed back. Running her hands across the keys one last time, the piano had become her second heart. Each key a memory, each vibration a pulse. She didn't need eyes to see its beauty. She could feel it in every fiber of her being. The maestro watched her from the doorway for a moment, then spoke softly. "Tomorrow there will be an audience. I want them to hear this duet." Mira froze. "An audience?" she whispered. "I've never played in front of so many before." "Then let this be the first," he said. "Let them see what music truly means." That night, Mira couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed every sound, every touch of the piano. She was nervous, not because of fear, but because she wanted to make the music real for everyone, not just herself. Her mother came and sat by her bedside, brushing her hair gently. "You've already made it real," she said softly. "You made them feel, and that's what matters most." Mira smiled, resting her hand over her mother's. "When I play tomorrow," she whispered, "I'll play for you, Mama, for every sound you help me hear." The next day would bring more than just a performance. It would bring a revelation, not only for the audience but for the maestro himself. For in that moment when music and heart became one, everyone in that hall would understand. The girl who could not see had just shown them what true vision really was. The night of the performance arrived like a storm of nerves and anticipation. The academy had never been this full. Every seat in the grand hall was taken, and the air buzzed with excitement. People whispered about the mysterious blind girl who had challenged the maestro and won his respect. Some came out of curiosity, others out of doubt. They wanted to see if the miracle was real, if a child who could not see could truly move hearts with her music. Backstage, Mira sat quietly on a wooden stool, her hands resting on her lap. She wore a simple white dress her mother had pressed carefully that morning. Her long hair was tied neatly, and the black silk blindfold covered her eyes as always. Her mother knelt beside her, whispering softly, "Just listen, my love. That's all you've ever had to do." Mira nodded. Taking a deep breath, her heart beat like a soft drum. Steady and calm, a knock came at the door. The maestro entered, dressed in his signature black suit, carrying a small smile that didn't appear often. "Are you ready, Mira?" he asked. She turned her head toward his voice. "I don't know if I'm ready, sir," she admitted honestly. "But I'm not afraid," he nodded approvingly. "That's all that matters." They stepped onto the stage together. The lights dimmed, and the soft hum of the audience faded into silence. Mira could feel the warmth of the stage lights on her face. She could sense hundreds of eyes watching her, waiting, judging. The maestro placed her hand gently on the piano, whispering, "Play like the world doesn't exist," he began first, his fingers gliding across the keys. The sound was rich and commanding, a grand opening full of power and pride. Then Mira joined in softly at first, like a whisper sneaking through a storm. The audience leaned forward instinctively. Her melody rose, blending with his, wrapping around his rhythm, calming it, challenging it, transforming it. The maestro played faster, testing her like before, but she matched him effortlessly. The piano became a battlefield and a dance floor at once. Each note an emotion, anger, wonder, sorrow, love. The duet grew, swelling into something bigger than them both. Mira didn't see the notes, but she felt every vibration, every shift in air, every tremor in sound. It was like the music was alive, moving through her veins. Suddenly, the maestro changed the key unexpectedly, his way of seeing if she could still follow. But instead of following, Mira paused for a heartbeat, smiled faintly, and turned his melody into something new, softer, lighter, almost like a lullaby. The maestro froze, astonished. He realized she wasn't following him anymore. She was leading, and yet she wasn't trying to outshine him. She was carrying him, guiding him. Her sound embraced his harsh tones, turning them into something pure. The maestro's hands trembled slightly, emotion rising in his chest. He looked at her, this blind girl who had come from nowhere. And for the first time in years, he felt humble. When the last note faded into silence, the hall remained still. No one moved. The world seemed to stop breathing. Mira sat with her fingers resting on the keys, the final vibration still echoing faintly under her touch. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. Slowly, others joined, and then the entire hall erupted in thunderous applause. The sound washed over Mira like a wave. Her chest tightened. She could hear people standing, cheering, crying. She smiled, turning her face toward the sound, tears shining beneath her blindfold. The maestro stood beside her, his hands trembling slightly. Then he did something no one had ever seen him do. He bowed deeply, not to the audience, but to Mira. The crowd gasped. "She's incredible," someone shouted. Another cried, "She plays like she can see into your soul." Phones flashed, cameras clicked, but none of it mattered to Mira. She whispered softly, "Thank you," her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for listening." After the performance, the maestro escorted her off the stage, his eyes glistening with pride. "Mira," he said softly, "you didn't just play tonight, you reminded people why music exists." She turned toward his voice, smiling. "Music exists to be felt, sir, not seen." Outside the hall, reporters gathered, students cheered, and people from the town crowded around to meet her. But Mira stayed close to her mother, holding her hand tightly. "They finally heard me, Mama," she whispered. "They really heard me." Her mother kissed her forehead. "The world hears the brave, my love." That night, as the maestro sat alone in his study, he replayed the performance in his mind. He had spent his entire life chasing perfection, clean technique, flawless execution, control. But that night, a blind girl had shown him something greater, feeling. She had turned his precision into poetry and his music into heart. He picked up a piece of paper and wrote a few words at the top, "The gift of sound, dedicated to Mira." It would become his most famous composition, inspired not by mastery but by emotion. Meanwhile, Mira sat by her window at home, listening to the soft sound of rain again. Her fingers moved on the windowsill as if playing invisible notes. Her mother came and sat beside her. "Do you ever wish you could see the crowd, see their faces?" she asked. Mira smiled. "No, Mama," she said softly, "because when I listen, I already do, and far away, in the hearts of everyone who heard her play that night, something had changed. People who came expecting to witness a trick had instead witnessed truth. For in that hall, under the lights and whispers, a blindfolded girl taught them what real vision sounded like. She didn't need eyes to show beauty. She had the kind of sight that could only come from the soul. The sun rose the next morning, spilling gold over the academy roof. But inside, it was unusually quiet. The echoes of last night's performance still lived in the air, The music hadn't just ended. It had left something behind, something that couldn't be erased. Every student who had heard Mira play seemed different, softer, more thoughtful. They had seen something they didn't fully understand. In the maestro's office, Victor Hale sat at his piano, fingers motionless over the keys. For years he had taught thousands of students, drilling them in precision and discipline. But none of them had ever moved him the way that blind girl had. He had spent the whole night thinking, staring at the keys that no longer felt like instruments but like questions. How can someone who sees nothing hear everything? He murmured to himself at that moment. The door creaked open and Mira stepped inside, holding her white cane. "Good morning, sir," she said softly. "You sound like you're thinking," he smiled faintly. "Always," he replied. "And you? Don't you ever rest after making the whole world stop breathing?" Mira chuckled, a light sound. "Music doesn't rest, sir. It only waits for someone to listen again." He gestured for her to sit beside him. "You've given me a challenge, Mira," he said. "You've shown me something I can't teach. And I hate not understanding." Mira tilted her head. "You don't have to understand it, sir," she said gently. "You just have to feel it," the maestro sighed. "You always make it sound so simple." "It is," she said. "You just forgot." He looked at her puzzled. "Forgot what?" "Forgot that music isn't about control. It's about surrender," she said softly. "You play to lead, I play to listen." Her words struck him deeply. Deeper than he expected. For a moment he just stared at her, realizing how far this girl had come, and how far he still had to go. "Then maybe," he said finally, "it's time I learned to listen again." That afternoon, the maestro did something he hadn't done in decades. He sat among his students, not as a teacher but as a learner. Mira sat at the piano in front of the class, nervous but determined. "Today," the maestro announced, "the teacher is blind and the students must see through her ears." A murmur spread through the room, half confusion, half wonder. Mira smiled. "Close your eyes," she said softly. "All of you." Some hesitated, but eventually, one by one, they did. "Now, play a single note," she instructed, "and tell me what it feels like." A boy pressed a key. The sound was sharp and bright. "It feels like light," Mira said instantly. "Try again." But listen harder. They played another note. Lower, slower. "That one feels like rain," she said. "Now what about this one?" She pressed a chord that trembled softly. "That's not a note," she whispered. "That's sadness." Waiting for someone to notice, the room fell silent. Even with their eyes closed, every student could see what she meant. Music had never felt so alive before. The maestro stood at the back, arms folded, watching the transformation happening right before him. When the lesson ended, the students didn't rush out like they usually did. They lingered, speaking quietly. Some wiped tears. Others just smiled in wonder. Liam, the boy who had once doubted her, approached and said, "Mira, when I play now, I can feel the sound in my chest." "It's like you opened my ears," Mira grinned. "No," she said. "You just opened your heart." Word spread quickly through the academy, and soon, people from outside began asking for lessons with the blind girl who could hear emotion. The maestro laughed whenever he heard that phrase. If only they knew, he'd say. She's not just teaching music, she's teaching life. Days turned into weeks, and Mira became more than a student. She was the heartbeat of the academy. Every morning, she'd arrive early to touch the piano. Feeling its quiet hum before anyone else entered, she'd say softly, "Good morning, friend," and the keys would answer with a faint vibration as if the instrument itself was happy to see her. One afternoon, the maestro brought her a letter. "It's from the Royal Music Conservatory," he said. "They want you to perform next month." Mira froze. "The Royal Conservatory?" she whispered. "That's the biggest stage in the country." The maestro nodded, smiling. "They saw your performance, and now the world wants to hear what I heard." Mira's heart raced. She thought of the crowds, the pressure, the expectations. "Sir," she said softly, "what if I can't do it?" "Then we'll fail together," he said with a grin. She laughed, shaking her head. "You don't seem like someone who fails." "You made me one," he replied warmly. "You beat me at my own art." That night, Mira walked home slowly with her mother, the city lights glowing like music she couldn't see but could feel. "Mama," she whispered, "what if I mess up on that big stage?" Her mother smiled gently. "My love, you've already succeeded. You're not playing for applause. You're playing for the little girl who once thought she'd never be heard." Mira hugged her mother tightly, her eyes wet beneath the blindfold. "Then I'll play for her," she whispered, "for the child who listened to the rain and dreamed of a song." The night before the grand event, the maestro stood alone in the empty hall, listening to the faint echo of old performances. He placed his hand on the piano and smiled softly. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "the world will learn to listen." And as the rain began to fall outside, gentle, rhythmic, and full of life, somewhere in her room, Mira smiled in her sleep, her hands twitching faintly as if she were already playing. She didn't need to see the future to know what was coming. She could feel it, like a melody waiting to be born, and this time, it would belong to everyone who had ever dared to dream in silence. The night of the grand performance arrived like a heartbeat, echoing through the entire city. The Royal Music Conservatory stood glowing under 1,000 golden lights, its marble steps crowded with people dressed in their finest. Reporters with cameras waited at the entrance, ready to capture the mysterious blindfolded girl who had stunned the world. Inside, the massive concert hall buzzed with whispers and wonder. The audience was restless but curious. No one could quite believe the stories they had heard. Backstage, Mira sat quietly, her hands resting on her lap. She wore a soft, cream-colored dress that shimmered faintly under the lights. Her blindfold was tied neatly, and her hair framed her calm face. Her mother sat beside her, gently holding her hand. "Are you nervous?" she whispered. Mira smiled faintly. "No, Mama," she said softly. "I'm listening." Her mother tilted her head. "To what?" "To the silence before the music," Mira replied. "It's the most beautiful sound of all." The maestro entered moments later, his black suit crisp, his eyes brighter than they had been in years. "Everyone's waiting for you," he said warmly. "The stage is ready." Mira stood slowly, holding her cane. "And you, sir?" she asked. "Are you ready?" He chuckled. "I've been ready since the day you made me listen." As they stepped toward the stage entrance, the hum of the crowd grew louder. Mira could feel their presence, hundreds of people breathing, shifting, waiting. The maestro took her hand and guided her forward. "Remember," he whispered, "don't play for them, play to them. Make them hear what silence sounds like," she smiled. "Yes, sir." The curtains opened and the hall fell silent. For a moment, Mira just stood there, still and composed, her blindfold catching the soft glow of the spotlight. The audience leaned forward, every sound fading until only the faint hum of electricity filled the air. Then she sat at the grand piano, touching the keys gently as if greeting an old friend. The maestro stood beside her for a moment, his hand resting on the piano. Then, instead of sitting down, he turned to the audience. "Tonight," he said, his deep voice echoing through the hall, "you will not just hear music. You will witness feeling." He looked at Mira, nodded once and said quietly, "Begin." Mira took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and then, with the softest touch, the first note was born. It floated through the hall like a whisper, delicate yet powerful. The audience collectively inhaled. Her melody grew slowly, blooming like dawn. She wasn't playing from memory. She was painting with sound. Every note told a part of her story: the loneliness of blindness, the laughter of her mother, the doubt of the crowd, the warmth of the maestro's voice when he said better. Each note carried emotion, fragile, trembling, alive. The maestro joined in, his playing bold and strong. Their music began to intertwine. Her tenderness met his intensity, and together they created a conversation of heartbeats. Sometimes she led, sometimes he followed. The melody shifted between storm and calm, sorrow and joy, light and shadow. People in the audience began to cry softly. Some closed their eyes, trying to feel what she felt. Others sat frozen, afraid to breathe. The music wasn't just sound, it was truth, raw and unfiltered. Halfway through the piece, Mira did something unexpected. She lifted her hands off the piano for a moment, letting silence fill the hall. The pause stretched long enough that people began to stir nervously. Then she played again, this time slower, deeper, as if whispering secrets only she could hear. The maestro followed her lead, his fingers trembling slightly. He realized she was no longer performing for the audience. She was performing for life itself. When the final note came, it was barely a sound, more a sigh, a breath shared between piano and soul. The hall stayed frozen. No one moved, no one clapped. It was as if time had stopped. Mira sat still, her hands hovering above the keys, listening to the echo fade. Then a single tear slipped down her cheek. She whispered softly, "Thank you, not to the crowd, but to the piano." The maestro, overwhelmed, stood beside her. His eyes glistened as he turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, "I present to you not a musician, but a miracle." And then the silence broke. The hall exploded into applause, a sound so loud it felt like thunder. People stood to their feet, shouting her name. Some were crying openly. Others simply clapped until their hands hurt. Mira stood slowly, her mother watching from the side. Tears running down her face, the maestro took Mira's hand and raised it high. The spotlight bathed them both in golden light. Reporters rushed forward, flashes went off like stars. "How did she do it?" Someone shouted, "What's her secret?" Another cried. But Mira just smiled softly and said, "The secret is to listen." When they left the stage, the maestro placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done it, Mira," he whispered. "You've made them all feel." She turned toward him, smiling gently. "No, sir, we did," that night, as the two of them sat together after the crowd had gone. The maestro looked at her quietly. "You know," he said, "I used to think greatness was about control, about perfection, but you taught me it's about trust. It's about letting go." Mira smiled. "That's what music does. It teaches us how to let go." They sat there for a long while. The lights dimmed, the piano silent but still glowing with warmth. The maestro turned to her one last time and said, "You didn't just change my music, Mira. You changed my life." And somewhere deep inside her, Mira knew this was more than just a performance. It was a promise that even in a world of darkness, sound could still paint light, and a blind girl could still make the world see outside. As the night wind carried the echo of her final note across the city, people who had been in that hall swore that they could still hear it, a faint, beautiful melody lingering in the air, like the heartbeat of hope itself. The morning after the concert, the whole city seemed to hum with the sound of Mira's music. Radios replayed her performance, newspapers printed her story, and social media was flooded with a single phrase: "The girl who made the world listen." Crowds gathered outside the academy gates, holding flowers and letters, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. The world had fallen in love, not with her blindness, but with her gift. Inside her small apartment, Mira sat at the breakfast table with her mother. The smell of warm bread filled the air. Her mother held a newspaper, her voice trembling with pride as she read aloud, "A blindfolded girl leaves the Royal Conservatory in tears, not of pity, but awe." She paused, smiling through her tears. "They're all talking about you, Mira." Mira laughed softly. "Are they talking about how I forgot to bow properly?" "They're talking about how you made grown men cry," her mother said. Brushing her daughter's hair gently, Mira tilted her head, her blindfold still resting over her eyes. "I didn't make them cry, Mama. The music did." At that same moment, in another part of the city, Maestro Victor Hale sat by his piano, staring at a blank sheet of paper. For hours he had been trying to compose, but every melody he began sounded incomplete, too mechanical, too perfect. Finally, he smiled and whispered, "You've ruined me, Mira." He picked up his pen and wrote on the top of the page, "Dedicated to the one who taught me to listen." The maestro had once been a man of fame, feared and respected by his students, but now people spoke of him as the teacher of the blind girl, and for the first time in his life, he was proud of being known through someone else's light. Later that day, Mira arrived at the academy. Guided by her cane, the moment she stepped inside, the students began to clap. Some even cheered. "Mira! Mira!" She blushed, whispering softly, "Please." "It's too much," but the maestro walked over and said, "Let them. You've earned every note of it." In the corner of the hall stood Liam, the boy who once doubted her, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. "These are for you," he said shyly. "I thought you might like them." Mira smiled, touching the petals gently. "They feel like sunlight," she said. "Thank you, Liam," he grinned. "You were incredible, Mira. You made me want to play again." She turned her face toward him. "Then don't stop," she said simply. "Music is never finished. It just waits for us to listen again." Weeks passed and life began to settle, but Mira's story continued to travel far beyond the academy walls. Invitations poured in, from Paris, from Tokyo, from New York. Every stage wanted her to perform. The maestro showed her the letters one by one. They're calling you the miracle girl, he said proudly. The world wants to hear you. But Mira only smiled softly. The world has already heard, sir. I think it's time I start listening again. The maestro frowned slightly. What do you mean? I want to teach, she said. There are other children like me. Children who feel the world but can't see it. I want them to know they can still make it sing. The maestro stared at her. Speechless for a moment, then he nodded slowly, a proud smile spreading across his face. Of course, he said, of course you will. Within months, the academy opened a new section, the School of Sound and Touch, founded by Mira and guided by the maestro. It was a place where sight didn't matter. Only feeling did. Children from everywhere came. Some blind, some deaf, some just lost. Mira would sit with them, guiding their hands on the piano, whispering, "Don't fight the silence." Listen to it, it always sings back, one afternoon. As she taught a small boy to press his first key, the maestro watched from the doorway, smiling quietly. The boy's laughter filled the room when he finally made a clear sound. Mira laughed with him. See? She said, the piano loves you already. After the class, the maestro approached her. You've turned this place into something sacred, he said softly. I've only turned it into what it was meant to be, she replied. A place where music isn't seen, but felt. Years passed and Mira's fame continued to grow. But she never chased applause. She still lived in her small apartment, still drank tea with her mother every morning, still tied her blindfold carefully before playing. People would ask her, why do you still wear it? And she would answer, because the world is full of distractions. This helps me stay inside the sound. One quiet evening, she and the maestro sat together after class. Watching the sunset Mira couldn't see, he said, You know, Mira, one day they'll write books about you. She laughed softly. Then I hope they use commas instead of full stops. Because music doesn't end, it just keeps breathing. The maestro smiled, his eyes misty. You've changed everything. No, sir, she said gently. You just finally listened. That night, when the lights dimmed and the academy halls went quiet, Mira stayed back at the piano, her fingers gliding softly over the keys. The tune she played wasn't grand or powerful. It was simple, gentle like a heartbeat. Her mother watched from the doorway, tears in her eyes as the final note faded. Mira whispered to herself, Thank you. She wasn't sure if she was thanking the piano, the maestro, her mother, or the music itself, maybe all of them, maybe the silence too. Outside, the city lights flickered like stars, and somewhere, someone hummed her song. The world she could not see had become a symphony she had taught to feel. And in that moment, as her melody floated into the night air, the blind girl who once stood alone on a stage now stood as a legend. Not because she could play, but because she could make people listen. The world finally understood her truth, that real vision doesn't come from the eyes, but from the heart that dares to hear.